Genesis chapter 50, verses 15 to 21. After the funeral, Joseph's brothers talked among themselves. What if Joseph is carrying a grudge and decides to pay us back for all the wrong we did him? So they sent Joseph a message. Before his death, your father gave this command. Tell Joseph, forgive your brother's sin and all that wrongdoing. They did treat you very badly. Will you do it? Will you forgive the sins of the servants of your father's God? When Joseph received their message, he wept. Then the brothers went in person to him, threw themselves on the ground before him and said, "We'll be your slaves." Joseph replied, "Don't be afraid. Do I act for God? Don't you see? You planned evil against me, but God used those same plans for my good. As you see all around you right now, life for many people. Easy now, you have nothing to fear. I'll take care of you and your children." He reassured them, speaking with them heart to heart.
Thank you. I feel like I should say I'm a volunteer. Just to check on something previous, did Lana say this year we're going to get active? So somebody better move the coffee on the dark roast. It's going to be a good year. Thank you for that mention of chaplaincy. Please pray for that. If spiritual care in our institutions isn't available to everybody, one of the hallmarks of justice in Canada goes down the drain. And right now, we're headed towards a place where I take care of mine, you take care of yours, and anybody in the middle, too bad for them. We can't let that happen. By the grace of God, the training program on the basic level will begin, in fact, is beginning right now. But we've got a mountain to climb to get what we really need and what this province deserves. Please pray for that, will you? Because we're inventing a wheel and I'm not even sure I've got a blueprint. Last time I was here, we talked about somebody called Jacob. I don't know if you remember that. It goes back to the big three founders of the nation of Israel. He's the third. And he's the no God guy who can't get by without doing a deal. He even tries to do a deal with God because he has real trust issues. And there's a reason for that. And he perpetuates that in his family. Marries two women. One of them, because he's tricked into it, she has most of the kids, but he loves the other one. And creates this family where everybody's trying to work the angle with somebody else. An awful way to be, but that's the way it is. He absolutely dotes on one boy who's the only child at that time born to the woman he loves. And everybody knows this kid is hiding behind his father's favor. So the kid acts it out. And dreams, big dreams about how he's going to rule the world and all the family, and incites all kinds of bad feelings, which his brothers act out, finally, when they get him alone one day, by selling him into slavery, which is option B. Option A was killing him. Lovely family. And he winds up sold into slavery in Egypt, where God intervenes in his life. It's always interesting when you read these Bible stories. When do they talk about God? God intervenes in his life when he's in prison. Excuse me. And God intervenes in his life when they discover he does dreams, although he's very specific. Now, I don't do dreams. God will give the interpretation. But the end result of it is that he rises to fame and second position power in the superpower called Egypt. And he's able to save that nation from starvation, which means he can do absolutely nothing wrong, and he has a wife given to him. 2 kids are born. One is called Manasseh, and he says, God has caused me to forget all my troubles, and one's called Ephraim, which means God's blessed me in this place, and the message is clear. It was all about me from the start, and I'm happy. So the story can be over, right? Next chapter. And way back home, they're hungry too. And Jacob says to his sons, you better go down to Egypt, because I hear they have some food. Well, go get some. Be quick about it. What are you doing here? And so, they set them all, except for one child, the most recently born after the one sold into slavery. His name is Joseph. His brother, the son now of his deceased wife, the woman he loved. Boy, talk about a complication there. Nah, he stays home. I don't care about the rest of you guys. You go and do the work, but he stays home. Man, how do you feel? And so, they went down to Egypt, not knowing that they were coming under the scrutiny of somebody who recognized them whom they did not recognize. And there's an aha moment. And Joseph's got a language he can pull on them. You know, when you speak 2 languages, that's pretty good. The person you're talking about or to can only speak one of them. Just switch, and it works. And he takes a look at them, and they say to him, we're honest men. We're honest men. We're honest men. We just like some food. We have a father, and there is another brother at home. You have to hear these things in order to understand the text of the morning. And Joseph looks at him and says, you're spies. You came to spy out our weakness. You're going to prison. And throws him in jail for 3 days. Now, talk about, have you ever got that? You hurt me. You can't hurt me anymore. But I can hurt you. You're going to jail. And then the next day he comes out and says to them, brings them out, I fear God. Do you really? I fear God. So I'll tell you what. One of you stays, the rest of you go home, come back, and bring your brother with you. They look at one another, because this is going really wrong. And they said, in his hearing, we're getting it from God because of what we did to Joseph. I'm not sure I have words to describe that moment. To hear them say what they did, and to know what's gone around has come back. One of those moments that is sweet at the moment and bitter thereafter. We're being punished for what we did. And I can almost sense Joseph saying, I'm just the guy to deliver us. And Simeon is bound. Joseph weeps for the first of 3 times. Our pains force us to a moment of decision. Every one of us, nobody escapes. They force us to a moment of decision. Simeon and the brothers bound, the rest of them are sent with their grain and all their money that they had to pay for it in their sack. First night out, one of them opens the sack and says, uh-oh. What's this? They say. Well, they all take a look at it. What's this that God has done to us? when you have a family background in which God's presence is as screwed up as Jacob made it, you call God's name at the oddest moments. And usually it comes out this way. God's never gracious, God's never good, but God will get you. And that's exactly what they've got. Here we are. This is the only when we talk about this. What is this that God has done to us? God gets kicked around like football in this thing. And they go home and they mention it to Jacob. This is what happened to us. Man, I don't know how to explain it. We've left the brother back in there. Here's the grain. Here's the money. We're screwed. And Jacob looks at him and he says, I really hate you guys. You, listen to the words. Listen to the man, the patriarch. You have deprived me. Everything is against me. There he is. That's the man. You've got to tell him to say, God, next time you're going to choose, talk to me first, will you? And Reuben, recognizing this is really doing something that he says to him, I'll tell you what, I'll pull this out of a hat for you, Father. And if I don't, you can kill my boys. Great. What's the body count in this one? I just can't wait to hear the end. And Jacob holds out to the very end until there's no bread left. And they say, look, we got to go. We could have been back there 3 times in the time you waited. When we were back there, let me give it to you straight again, in case you didn't get it the first time, that man questioned us closely. He knows what's going on, right? We got to take Benjamin or we starve to death. That's the youngest son. That's the deal. And Judah then pipes up and says, and if this one goes wrong, you can blame me. You've got all these people who want to take the blame. None of this is helping. Because we're all here with our unresolved issues, and we're not doing anything about it, and we're still following exactly the same patterns that our family has followed since I can remember. And we keep doing what we're doing, we keep getting what we're getting. None of that's food. And Jacob says, all right, take 2 times the money and all the gifts that you have, and take Benjamin. And if I lose, I'll be bereaved. And then, may God Almighty grant you mercy. I think it's the first good thing he's ever said about God. May God Almighty grant you mercy. When your back is to the wall and the gun is to your head, talk mercy. Do you know what really gets me? We're like this, aren't we? We'll say good about God. That's the last card we've got to play. Do you know what really drives me crazy? God hears it. Seriously? God hears it. For the first time in his life, this man has to trust. No animals, no deals, everything on the table. This man has to trust. And it reminds me that if I'm ever going to grow, I will have to trust. And when you trust, it feels like something is breaking. It really does. Somebody said, that's when spirituality starts. Whoa. So back they go, with Benjamin in tow. Joseph sees him coming and he says to his servants, put him up in my house. Oh no, please, could we camp? No. Put him up in my house. Serve him my food. And give him this greeting. Your God and the God of your fathers has given you treasure. That's why you had the money back in your sack. When they saw the money, they said, God's going to punish us. When Joseph brings it back, he said, God has blessed you. One of these things is not linking it. Okay? Or maybe it is. Is something that hurts me something that also could bless? Don't mess with my mind here. And they bring out Simeon. know what? For the first time, and who knows how long, in one room, all the brothers are together. How's your father? Good. Is this, Benjamin, is this your brother? Yes, it is. This is the one we left behind. Joseph weeps again before the sight of the brother he's never known, the son of his mother. And he sits him down to eat by birth order. I'll talk about, just a little book. How's he know? I wonder who's the first one to recognize him. We are sitting together. Oh, he's on to something here. And he sends them back with their sacks full of grain and their silver, and he places his chalice in Benjamin's sack, then sends his troops out to arrest them. Because he can. Because the power now lies in his hands, as the power lies in the hands of anybody who's healed, restored, and knows they can't hurt you anymore. And the brothers who hear the announcement, "What have you stolen?" Joseph's chalice, say, "That person will die, it's none of us." And open up Benjamin's bag. And it's almost as though the text is saying, you must really need to learn how to take care of one another. Because you keep committing one or the other of you to death at the hands of other people. Sounds like the headlines I read this morning. And when they're brought back, and that chalice is there, that's what Joseph uses to interpret dreams and things. Joseph looks at them and said, "You stole that. Don't you know that I can divine things?" Whatever happened to, dreams belong to God. He'll give the interpretation. Now we're down to, I can divine things. I've spent a little bit of time as the powerful one in Egypt. And I might have forgotten my roots as well, or what God has done in my life. I can divine things. God has uncovered your servant's guilt, they say. We have nothing to say. Guilty as charged. God. And so you extort from those who hurt you a confession. Aren't you proud? Man, there's a ton of gospel in that. Judah said, "Make me a slave, not Benjamin." You see, our father had 2 wives, and the wife he really loved had 2 sons, and one went away. Still can't say it out loud. He was likely torn to pieces. That's what his father thinks. And his father's been in misery ever since. And for the first time, Joseph now hears not only what his brothers think, but what his father might know. And what his father feels, and also, think of this for somebody in our age who does not know their parents. That his father never once searched for it. And still hasn't. Gave him up for dead. And he's now closely bound up with the other brother who's born, standing before you now. And you get that sort of feeling that Joseph has that "what am I, chopped liver" feeling. Like, how is it that you just let me go? It doesn't matter how badly we were hurt. The fact of the matter is that we were born for community, and the cry of our heart till the day we die. Does anybody care to hang on to me? Look at it. Worried last night that a teenager that I care about just went to the United States to live with a guy that she met online. And I'm thinking about this. Is she actually there? She's not my relative. Does anybody care? Is she being trafficked? Does anybody know? How many people walk our streets wondering if they've got any connections whatsoever? It's exactly what we've got here. And it is the great question. Pardon a little bit of preaching here. Wherever God ever does anything, He begins by creating community. The last thing in the world God wants is for it to end. The first thing I read in the paper today, it wasn't in the paper, it was on the news, is the British Prime Minister speaking about ISIS and saying, they're not Muslims. They're monsters. Which says to me, you can cut them loose and kill them. And I'm reading this story. I'm supposed to be a Christian. What's up? I don't get it. Joseph can stand it no longer, he says to them, I'm Joseph. And then he utters a truth that I think has been coming up from inside. That's the kind of, way down underneath our pain and our healing and all the rest of that. Something else. Pushing up. Not about you. I am Joseph. Listen to these words. It was to save lives that God sent me and you. No soul into slavery, no forgotten by my father, no, never look for me. God sent me ahead of you to save lives. Where'd that come from? And to preserve for you a remnant on earth. This story becomes extraordinarily important at a time in the life of Israel when they're a pipsqueak nation in a superpower world. They've lost their land, they've lost everything else. And the question is, are we even going to survive? And the message of this story to them is, yes, you are, even if it's a remnant. You are going to survive because God's purposes will be there, even if He uses a nice country boy like Joseph, who is placed amongst the superpowers and exalted in power to accomplish God's purposes, like He did with Daniel, like He did with Ruth, like He did with Esther. All of those stories come on stream about this time in the Bible. God's purposes are not ended, which is why you are reading about Israel in the Herald. Oh yeah. God had a reason for what happened to me. Doesn't mean it was right, doesn't mean it didn't hurt, doesn't mean it wasn't bad. It just means God had a reason. And God acted together with the actions of human beings for whatever purpose. God accomplishes His purposes. And that will give you enough to argue ethically for a lifetime. It's still true. It was to save lives. God sent me ahead of you. We got to finish this pretty quick. A number of years ago, as I served in pastoral ministry, a young woman came to me, age 21. She said to me, when I was 14, a youth in a youth group in another church, a youth worker sexually abused me. And you know what you're thinking? Oh. She said to me, now age 21, I want you, the elders of this church that I now attend, to gather the pastor and the elders of the church that man attends now. I want you to gather us together with him for a meeting. No tension in that. I did. I will never forget the meeting. We sat together, all of us. Elders, pastors, herself, and one older man with a wildness and a terror in his eyes. That young woman looked at him and said, I can put you in prison. That is not my desire. I have called my church together and my community to support me, and I have called your church community together to support you because I want you to be healed. And I want you to tell the truth. And I want your church to commit, to hold you and not let you go. And I want your church to commit to hold your feet to the fire until you are whole. Through whatever pattern of therapy seems appropriate. I'll leave that up to you. I had nothing to say. I still don't. But every time I get angry about something that's happened to me and the relative level of justice that's been meted out in my life, I feel somebody tapping me on the shoulder. It's Jesus Christ from a cross, unjustly executed, who says not, I forgive you, but Father, forgive them. And calls forth purposes greater than any intention that put nails in his hand. Just as that young woman did. Called forth purposes and goals that were far greater than just, I'll get you for this. God touched me on the shoulder and said, remember when you tell your story, Peter, sheep listen. Yeah, I get it. Joseph brought the whole family down and fed them with his people and gave them the land of Goshen, which was a great place to raise flocks and herds. And Jacob died down there having seen his sons and his family back together again. And the Egyptians gave him a state funeral as if to say Israel. And the family of Israel is now a nation and the nations recognize it. But when it was done, and this is probably an ending to the book of Genesis, because the people at the time it was received needed to hear this. Jacob's dead. Now what? Jacob's dead. Now maybe it's time for the knives to come out. They just read the will. Mom and Dad are gone. So okay, there's no more reason for us to hang together, is there? We don't really believe in community, do we? Doesn't matter if our story perishes, right? So they come and they say, your father, Joseph, begged us to tell you to forgive us for what we've done. Kind of like, we know it's not going to do any good if we ask. So we'll say, there's no evidence that Jacob ever came up with the idea. But we'll at least put it this way and see if we can work a deal. Whereupon Joseph looks to them and says, the words that we need to hear. We need to hear personally, we need to hear as a church, we need to hear them nationally. I, God, am I in the place of God? Do I do God's work when it comes to this? You said you were the servants of God. I'm going to turn you back to him. Because, and he repeats it, it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. A great nation, to save many peoples. And it reminds me so much of God's intention from the start to bless all families of the earth. It reminds me so much of the New Testament teaching that the gospel is not just for the Jews, but that God has flung the door open to the Gentiles. And boy, have we had a discussion since then. Every one of us, once we're in, deciding who else should be left out. No. But rather what happens is that despite the injury done to my life or any other thing, my Christian faith brings me to the point to say, be men for evil. God had other plans. And in the midst of all of this, I opt for the plans of God. So I've got doors. And until the serpent is truly not broken.